Ooh, Pearl's back? That means we need to talk about what's going to be good on Pearl. So the first thing I wanted to do was take a look back when Pearl was last in the map pool, which was a long time ago at this point, and a lot has changed, as you're going to see in this video, because back in the day, the old meta in Pearl, going back to like Champs 2023, e.g. we're on top of the world, well, the comps that we were seeing on Pearl in those days was actually still largely dominated by a very different meta, right? The most played comp in that season of 2023 was the Harbor Viper, Sky, Jet Killjoy. The Swamp comp was the Pearl meta comp for the most part. Now there was towards the end of the season some variations, people going away from that and playing kind of, more double Initiator, maybe Sova KO kind of stuff. But you can see that things have changed quite a lot since those days. And so today, I don't think we're going to be talking about Harbor and Sky too much in this one. So there's a lot of possibilities here, but let's break down how it's going to play out. We'll start with the controllers. And the controllers, I think, is probably the easiest class to talk about when it comes to Pearl, because even back then with the kind of bad Astra, when people weren't playing Harbor Viper, Astra was the common pick. And I think considering the Astra buff that we just got, there's basically no way that Astra just isn't the main choice for pretty much whatever comp you're running. I think Astra will be close to 100% on Pearl. Astra has always kind of been seen as the better of the two options on Pearl in general over Omen, and as I say, with the new buff, it seems almost a certainty that Astra will be played almost 100% of the time. The only question when it comes to controllers is whether Viper also is worth playing, right? Whether going for a double controller comp is the correct option, and I think if I had to guess, Viper will see some play on Pearl, because Viper is still good on Pearl, right? Like, Viper has always been good on Pearl. Viper is just good in general. But I do think that the way that the game is going, the direction that a lot of teams are kind of, playing the game right now, I think that Viper's pick rate won't be, that high. I think Viper will be a kind of secondary or tertiary kind of option for a lot of teams. You'll see it somewhat, but maybe not a ton. That's not to say that you shouldn't play Viper in your ranked games or whatever, because Viper is good on Pearl. But I think when it comes to the highest levels of the game, you will see some Viper, but not meta. Okay, and now let's move on to the Sentinel class as well. Now, when we left Pearl, the Sentinel class was just largely dominated by Killjoy. Killjoy was just the de facto kind of option for a lot of teams on Pearl. And will that stay the same? Well, again, we might have a bit of problems here, because generally I would say there has been a shift in the Valorant meta away from Killjoy and towards Cypher just in general. Now, Cypher is apparently going to get some kind of nerf, so that might impact it, right? If the Cypher nerf is pretty big, then maybe we will just go back to a full Killjoy map. However, if that Cypher nerf isn't that big and we end up still in this kind of same meta where I think a lot of people prefer Cypher in general, and Killjoy obviously still sees some play, on the Killjoy maps like Ascent and whatnot, I think the Pearl might operate in a similar sort of spot where I still think you would expect to see some Killjoy, because Killjoy, the lockdowns are pretty good, some of the setups are still pretty good there for Killjoy, but I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being kind of almost a 50-50 split, at least at the start of the season, as people try and figure out what is better between Cypher and Killjoy, because I think both of them have options and both can be used to a pretty decent ability, so I think either choice is fine. When it comes to the other Sentinels, though, I'm not sure you'll be seeing a ton. It might be interesting to see what an agent like Vice can do on the map, but I wouldn't be surprised to not see too much of Chamber, Vice, Sage, or Deadlock. Moving on to the Initiators, and this is where, again, things have certainly changed a lot from the kind of solo Sky days. Really don't think you'll be seeing a lot of that whatsoever. I think in today's day and age, for me, Sova is probably going to be the dominant choice. Sova, again, towards the end, kind of, Champs 2023, was seeing some play already, right? Teams like EG were actually playing, kind of Sova, Yoru, Jet, very aggressive, and there was quite a lot of teams also playing like Sova, KO, Jet. So I would expect that Sova to become a pretty common option. Sova obviously does pretty well against either Cypher or Killjoy, so that's an advantage, and I think that Sova on the map is just going to be pretty decent. But who you pair the Sova with for that kind of secondary Initiator slot, if that is the direction most teams will be going in, is an interesting debate. And this is where you could end up with a bit of a kind of Sunset meta, I think, in a way, right? Where on Sunset, the meta is basically, you're going to play one of Neon or Rage, you're going to play Omen and Cypher, And then it's like, what two initiators do you like? Now, most teams tend to like the Sova. As I said, I would expect that to be the case again. But you can get Sova Breach. You can get Sova KO. You can get Sova Gecko. You can sometimes, you know, go Gecko KO, right? Like, there is kind of a mix and matching to this that I would expect to be very much a part of the Pearl meta too, where you might just get, like, you know, slightly different combinations of those kind of initiators kind of consistently coming in. Fade, of course, as well on Pearl isn't a bad option either, so you could also see some Fade, but I would expect most people these days to be leaning in towards Sova over Fade, and then kind of, you know, mixing and matching between what other initiator they like for their team. But there is one initiator that I think somewhat depends on what the Duelist meta will be, and that is Breach, of course, because when it comes to the Duelist meta, Pearl was always very, very Jet dominant. Now, I did mention that EG were playing Yoru as well, and of course Yoru can find some value on Pearl, and I think with the place that Yoru is in now, I think people think that Yoru is a bit better than they did back then. So maybe you will see even more Yoru than you did before, and Yoru kind of allows you to perhaps open up with some other things. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some Yoru, but of course we have to again talk about Neon, because if we do get a lot of Neon, then I think that that will help Breach in the Initiator class as well. But will we see Neon on Pearl? That is an interesting question, because I still have this feeling that the Duelist meta might end up more kind of like the Abyss Duelist meta overall, where you do see some Neon on Abyss, and some people are willing to run Neon on Abyss, but it's kind of more Jet dominant, and then maybe Yoru is another option as well, and that's kind of what I think that Pearl will be if I had to guess. Maybe the Neon takeover will just be completely, you know, overwhelming in all aspects of the game, but I do think that the confidence and kind of, you know, the calmness that a lot of people have on Jet, you know, the familiarity of Jet on a map like Pearl, at least to begin with, will take place. Now, I'm sure that some people will try Neon if Neon doesn't get changed, and maybe they'll find success with it, and if so, then maybe everyone will move over to Neon. But I do think there are basically three options that you probably can find some success with in Jet, Yoru, and Neon, but for the meantime, I would suspect that Jet would be the primary choice still, until it's kind of proved otherwise. Now, of course, one thing I should just quickly mention as well is that we are getting this Phoenix buff, and many of you will remember the Paper Rex Phoenix on Pearl, and even in the Phoenix buff kind of, you know, like little reveal thing, it was on Pearl, right? And I think that Pearl is a map where Phoenix, you know, could find some success potentially, so maybe once we get to, you know, patch 8.10, when Phoenix does get those changes, like maybe then actually Phoenix could be a pretty decent option, and maybe instead of those initiators that I was talking about, maybe you play, you know, Jet Phoenix or Neon Phoenix, right, with a Sova as your initiator. Maybe that's the direction that people would go in instead, which of course would be very cool to see, because on a map like Pearl, the ult orbs are very farmable for the Phoenix. You can often get 3-4 ults. You know, the wall going through walls is definitely going to help as well. I think there's some potential there when Phoenix does get those buffs. And so those are just some of my little theories there on what we are likely to see on Pearl. As I say, things have changed quite a lot since those old days. Let me know what you think in the comments down below.